Look, yeah, thanks, Noel. It's good. It's good to be back, and we haven't spoken for a little while. But the Tin Conference is a great opportunity last month to get an update on where the tin world's at, and certainly venture. We were, I suppose, if you like, leading the re-education of the planet, the industry about what tin was used, and when we did this back in circa 2010, tin was all about lead-free solder, and it was a big transformation from having 40% lead in your solder to 4% silver, and the rest would be 96% would be tin. And in 2010 we sort of led the charge along with our colleagues at Casbar Resources, Venture and Casbar out there telling the world about this, and tin hit $33,000 a tonne, so that was a record price back in 2010. But it's we were well known in the tin sector, but now we're back rejoined at the tin organisation, International Tin Association as it's called now. The name did change slightly, but we're back in Explorers and Developers Group, and good timing. We're updating our feasibility study. We're going underground. It's a different, smaller, higher grade project, and certainly for us, I wanted to go there and listen to other members of the tin world, and unfortunately China wasn't represented because of obviously the lockdown situation in China, but to hear the major players like Indonesia and Peru, the guys at Minsur got probably the best tin project in the world, the highest one at San Rafael, talk about what they're doing in the sector, and certainly to elaborate further on that, Indonesia announced that very much what they did in nickel is that the country wants to do value add, so it will be looking to ban exports of concentrate of tin from sometime this year, like very, very soon. And when you think about Indonesia has around about 25-30% of the world's tin production. That's quite significant. So what could happen is that, what is happening is that Indonesia basically got up there and said, we are seeking investment to build these downstream facilities, and we don't want to produce bars of tin, or more likely solder, or get into the electronics side of things, or even chemicals, because like tin's not about tin plating. Tin plates are like 12% of the use. It's all about solder, which is like 49% of the use. So, and that was part of that re-education process back in 2010. But if that happens, then there's the ability for China to they produce around just under 50%, that they could, if they invest into downstream facilities and they buy that end product, then they could be controlling closer to 70-75% of the tin in the world, which would be interesting play when you compare that, very similar to a rare earth or even tungsten, and which is obviously part of this very quickly emerging battle between the superpowers of China and the US, and the change in the whole global dynamics, where all of a sudden we're going back to being nationalistic. This is all kind of like pre-Berlin Wall falling days, where just going back to tungsten for a second, where the US dumped its strategic stockpile of tungsten in the market because there was no longer a Cold War. But that Cold War is well and truly back, albeit two different countries, China and the US. But that was one aspect of, it was a big announcement to come out, and I think it had I think there's a fair degree of shock about it in the tin world, and maybe the rest of the world hasn't really quite cottoned onto that. I suppose one clear message at the conference was a lot of the countries are in high-risk ESG jurisdictions, and there was a huge emphasis. So all the countries operating in the DRC or in South America or in Asia are talking about ESG, and that's something that, or sustainability. There's something that, there was a company stood up with an Australian asset and said, I don't have to talk about that because we're in Australia, which is very, very true, but obviously we still got to do it, but and some are better placed than others. For example, our project's got hydropower, and that other project didn't have access to hydropower, but renewable energy. But certainly it's a big thing for those other ones, because they've got to convince the funds in the UK, and I spoke to many fund managers in London last month, and many in New York just before the tin conference, and ESG is at the forefront of the box they need to tick in terms of investment into helping companies like us build these assets, and so that's another aspect. And the tin's quite well placed because of the tracing systems they put in, and there's a tin code 7.3, and trying to meet that sort of United Nations goal of trying to achieve net zero emissions and all that. Tin's well placed to do that. It has the necessary steps, but then you've got to meet those guidelines. And I suppose what we got out of it is that there is a possibility of getting a premium for a green tin product. That may emerge over the coming years, and certainly that would help Venture's case. And last but not least, we heard from the guys in the solder industry, and that was very interesting. For example, obviously, we talk a bit about semiconductors, and semiconductors don't have tin. There's actually tungsten in semiconductors, but to stick the semiconductor onto the circuit board, you need 4 blobs of glue, better known as solder, which are 96% tin, so they are quite closely related. And what an interesting aspect of that presentation was that there's this superpower war on semiconductor production, and Taiwan is in control, and China is well ahead of the race in the US. It's invested $150 billion on making those factories, and I think there's about 3 types of those that need to be able to produce semiconductors, and they're out there spending that money now, whereas this solder group, they're lobbying the government in the US. There's a bill up in front to spend $50 billion to build that. So the US is very good at designing, but not very good at manufacturing and building semiconductors, and that's where there's a huge disconnect. So there's a map showing that there's factories in the US being built, or hubs, or where they build these and design these things, but where they build them, it's the imbalance is that it goes straight back into China. So maybe there'll be some deal to be had with South Korea or Japan to build these, because it's certainly the US is way behind. So I suppose 3 very interesting points: Indonesia, ESG or sustainability, and clearly that the demand for solder is going to well and truly outstrip what supply is going forward. There's no doubt about that. The little hiccup in the price we've had now, the tin's come off from 37,000 or even as high as in the low 50s briefly back in March. I think that's a blip in the radar going forward, and I think when you talk about your mobile phone's got 4 cents or maybe even today 3 cents worth of tin in it, or 0.7 of a gram, if the tin price goes to $100,000, it'll become 9 cents. So it has no impact. It's called a spice metal, a little bit of tin of everything. The price could go to $200,000 and it still would make a difference to your iPhone. So that's an interesting dynamic. The world wants sustainable tin.